While Governor Brown was in China, a federal appeals court denied his request to lift a court-ordered cap on California's prison population. A three-judge panel threatened him and other state officials with contempt of court. But Brown says he will fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if he has to. Joining us to discuss this and the other stories in the week's news are Chuck Nevius, columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Josh Richman, politics reporter for the Bay Area News Group. Chuck, Josh, welcome. Josh, why is Governor Brown being so defiant on this issue?
Well, he had declared victory, essentially, after getting the prison population significantly decreased through what has been called realignment of spinning what had been state prison inmates out to county jails and other facilities in order to bring the population down very fast. And now he's sort of between a rock and a hard place. He's taking a lot of flack from his political foes for letting people out who subsequently may commit crimes. Every time there's one of these realignment people commits a new crime, there's a press release about it from somebody who's critical of it. And at the same time, he's got the courts breathing down his neck saying, you've made good progress, but you're not done yet. You're still at 150% of your prison's capacity, and you still have a major overcrowding problem and problem with the provision of mental and other health services.
It's a bit of a lose-lose. I mean, you can't go wrong with crime. It's going to be a bad thing no matter what. But I happen to have taken a couple of trips to San Quentin, and the crowding there is unbelievable. The size of those cells and the idea that you have 2 and 3 people in a place where you can touch both walls with your hands, both sides have a really good point. So it's interesting to see where this will fall out.
And this has been going on since, that first ruling in 2009. They lost an earlier ruling in January, I believe, was the first round of this latest round.
Right.
Is this political fight, Chuck Nevius, do you think this political fight is worth it?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, he's got it, so he's going to have to fight it no matter what. But I think, has there ever been a politician like Jerry Brown? I mean, he's just a fascinating guy. It's just like John said. He's 75 years old. He doesn't have another job in mind. He's going to say what he thinks. He's got this. He thinks this is the right idea. He feels like he's getting prisoners out of there. As ironically, San Francisco has some openings in the county jail. San Francisco, for once, has a less crowded jail. So there's a possibility to make some movement on this, and it's a good issue. I don't know if it's a good political issue, but it's an issue he has to confront.
And let's make it clear, let's not have any illusions. California's prisons, regardless of whether the the court standard is the right one or the governor's standard is the right one, we're still wildly overcrowded.
Wildly overcrowded, yeah. One of the most overcrowded prison systems, the second most overcrowded prison system in the country, yeah.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on it, see whether or not he actually does decide to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. Moving on now to gun control, Congress is advancing bills for federal background checks and for stronger laws against gun trafficking. Josh, California already has some of the strictest gun control laws in the country. What would new federal laws possibly mean for us?
Not a whole lot, most likely. We already have the background check, universal background checks in California, which go further than even what has been reached in a compromise in Congress, in the Senate right now. That would not cover private person-to-person sales, as California already does. We have an assault weapons ban. We have a ban on large capacity magazines. We have a 10-day waiting period. These are things that Congress isn't even contemplating. So it's not going to have all that much effect here. It is playing out very messily in Congress. Just today we had 47 House Republicans write to Speaker Boehner urging him not to even bring the background check bill to a vote in the House. So even though the Democrats were able to break the filibuster in the Senate this week, it still faces a very uncertain future ahead. And then here in Sacramento, in California, we're looking to make those tightest in the nation laws even tighter. State Senate Democrats sort of consolidated their bills into a package this week that they call the Life-Saving Intelligent Firearms Enforcement Act, the Life Act.
Yeah.
There's always an acronym.
Got to have an acronym.
Got to have an acronym. But these are very controversial bills, some of them. One of them would essentially ban the sale and manufacture of any semi-automatic rifle with a detachable magazine, regardless of capacity, regardless of features. Another one would require background checks for ammunition sales. I mean, these are very far-reaching bills. I have to think it's going to be difficult, even with the Democratic supermajorities that we have in the legislature. There are some suburban and rural Democrats who are simply not going to vote for these, probably, but they are making a concerted push, and these bills do come to a first committee hearing next week.
Isn't the big issue, though, in California, the gun sales across state lines? Isn't that a big part of it in Nevada? And is there anything that nationally they're going to be able to do? We had a Chronicle reporter go to a gun show, and it was harrowing to hear these people walking down the aisle and say Glock for sale, $100. Right. See someone hand the guy $100, and he handed him the gun, and that was the transaction. That was the background check.
Right. Which isn't supposed to happen, but it does. They should be checking for ID to make sure you're in the state. Ironically, the proposal that's pending in Congress right now would actually permit gun dealers, not people at gun shows, but permit gun dealers to sell firearms across state lines, which they can't currently do without essentially sending to another dealer, licensed dealer in your home state and doing it that way.
It seems like we kind of have an ideal situation in some ways in California with all these far-reaching laws. I remember the Chris Rock joke that says we don't need gun control, we need bullet control. All bullets should cost $5,000. Is there anything for Congress to take away from California's experience briefly before we move on, or are we just too different from what Congress is dealing with for them to extrapolate anything?
I think there's practically no chance of Congress emulating the laws that we have here. There just doesn't seem to be the votes for it, even though most polls have shown majority support for an assault weapons ban, for a large capacity magazine ban. It's closer majorities, and it's probably not enough to carry the day nationally.
Gotcha. Well, moving on to a shootout of a very different kind, NBA officials are puzzling over whether the Kings should stay in Sacramento or whether they may leave for Seattle. The latest report suggests a local group of investors is still fighting to keep the Kings in town. Chuck Nevius, this is one of the weirdest sports stories that has ever happened.
This is not a sports story. It's a Gothic novel. It's we've got backstabbing, we've got riches, we've got people with double crossing. If we had a mysterious woman in red, we'd have the entire novel here. It's a very strange story. You're right. It's a small market. Sacramento has the lowest attendance in the league. Mm-hmm. It's a single market. In other words, we've only got one team there. They're passionate about their team, but they're not really making a go of it. Meanwhile, Seattle lost its team, the Supersonics. They won another team. They have some deep pocket guys, including Steve Ballmer, whose wealth is estimated at $15 billion.
CEO of Microsoft.
Former CEO of Microsoft. And he and another investor have made a terrific offer. But Kevin Johnson, the mayor of Sacramento, sees this as a line in the sand. He's going to keep him here, and he's lined up investors too.
The latest from the Sacramento Bee, I'm sorry to jump in, but the latest from the Sacramento Bee is that the head of the Seattle investment group, Chris Hansen, who is a Bay Area guy, by the way, is supposedly thinking about raising his bid for the Kings by $25 million. So the money keeps kicking back and forth. Why does Sacramento need a basketball team?
Well, I think I was telling Josh earlier, I grew up in Colorado. At the time, the Denver Broncos were the only team in town. We had a baseball team that was AAA. The basketball team was ABA. That meant so much to that city. There was a sense of identity that the best teams in the NFL were going to come to our town and they're going to play. And that's what happens in Sacramento. They have a little bit of inferiority complex. I think that's probably safe to say. And that sense of this is who we are. We represent nationally as an NBA basketball team. It's a little bit of misplaced pride, but I think that's a big part of it. I don't think you can misplace the passion of it.
Even outside of Sacramento, there's some participation that's growing to try to keep the Kings, at least in Northern California. I mean, Chris Kelly, the former Facebook officer who ran for Attorney General a couple of years ago. Do you expect that if the Seattle offer keeps increasing, we're going to see more and more Californians get involved in this?
That's going to be the attempt. But I think the really important person that's gotten involved, and that is going to be the key to this whole thing, is David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA. Next week, the board of directors meets and, in theory, are going to sort this out. They're going to make a decision. He does not want to have franchises move on his watch. There have been 6 so far. He doesn't like it. And when he started this, he was not a big fan of the Sacramento offer. He didn't feel like they had the money. They have apparently demonstrated to him, to his satisfaction, the money is there. If that's the case, he doesn't want him to move. He's going to try to find something to do. The obvious choice would be to put an expansion team in Seattle. He said he's not going to do that either. But he's very invested in this. And oddly enough, there's an interesting connection, which is this guy, Vivek Ranadive, who's one of the investors in Sacramento, is Indian. Stern is convinced the game is going to go global. He was just in Mumbai telling Indian journalists that there would be an Indian player in the NBA in the next 5 years. So another reason, just another crazy twist to the whole thing, to keep them in Sacramento, make this guy happy, tie everything together.
And not necessarily as crazy as some might think. I mean, Jeremy Lin looked like a long shot before there was a Jeremy Lin.
Right.
Zoom out 30,000 feet before we move on to our next segment. there seems to be a lot of movement with sports arenas. The A's want to go to San Jose. The Warriors are coming over to San Francisco. The Kings could leave for Seattle. There's all this conversation about sports arenas. The 30,000-foot view of all of this, what does this mean for us in the Bay Area and Sacramento? How does this really touch our lives?
I blame the Giants.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, here's the deal. Baseball was the leader. And they were the first ones to realize that rather than build a big round ashtray and put a baseball stadium in it, you build something quirky and weird and a little fun, and the fans came like crazy.
A destination.
A destination. You've got a civic center. You've got a place that you go and you enjoy yourself, not just to see the game, but you enjoy the trappings, the area around it. Baseball hitched onto that right away. Football did some of it. You saw Jerry Jones in Dallas make it bigger and better and so forth. Now these arenas are asking for, they want internet, they want to have interconnections. We've got to have the latest state of the art to make that work. And an odd part of all this is the owners are a little worried about television, who are doing such a great job of televising the game. Why should I drive over and pay $50 for parking,
right,
$11 for nachos? You know, why don't I just stay at my home and watch the couch?
All right, we shall see what happens.